Hello, everybody. A Hangry Table here, and we are going to be talking about architecture today. Yes, I know you're all very excited about that. In particular, we're going to be talking about some bridges. We have a bridge to sell to you if you'd like for only $1. What do you think? Hey, guys.
Sounds good to me. I'm glad you didn't say we were going to talk about dentistry. So,
So we are going to be talking today about the film, the legend, the classic, let me pull up the thumbnail here, A Bridge Too Far. And I have to say that right off the bat, this was a film I hadn't seen before, and this is starting to become a disturbing trend. I'm realizing how many of these classics that I've missed out on. But when it was first suggested to us that we watch this film, and I think it was Lou who was the one who did that.
And let me just pause you for a second to say I suggested this because we did Where Eagles Dare, a great war movie about a totally fictional situation. And I thought to contrast it, we should pick one that's based on a real story, as this one certainly is.
Well, and the closest I've ever had to this film, or my only frame of reference with this film, is the following.
Hey, fatty, I got a movie for you. A Fridge Too Far.
Did you guys see that? Did that come through?
Yeah, but I never saw it originally, and I wondered what the reference was, but what the heck.
There you go. A Fridge Too Far. So anyway, this film, all right, right off the bat, as I was going into it, the credits started rolling. And again, I went into this completely cold, and I'm like, oh my. Because you see Dirk Bogarde, James Caan, then Michael Caine, then Sean Connery, then like Elliot Gould, Gene Hackman, Anthony Hopkins, Robert Redford. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like the Avengers of films, basically.
Well, and that's a big part of how the film got financed, was based on those stars. They were able to sell it in advance in various territories. This is a technique that was used later on another war movie about a fictional situation that someday we should do, called Victory, which is about a POW soccer team. And they got Pele and they got all these famous European soccer players to be in it. And in each country where they released the film, whoever their local star was got top billing. So
interesting. No.
Also, we know that the deal was that they all got $250,000 a week until they found out that Redford's agent got him $500,000, and especially Sean Connery got rather upset about that.
Oh my!
Because,
all right,
Connery was very much about don't cheat me on the money. So
yeah. Well, okay, hey, Lauren, do you want to give us a little bit of a summary or synopsis about what happens in this film? It's not just about a bridge for sale.
Well, I'll try and give a brief one. It's a little tricky because in a lot of ways the movie is, while there is a through line, it's a series of vignettes that each kind of string together. But the gist of it is that a plan is put together to do a massive paratrooper drop behind enemy lines with the intention of capturing 3 bridges. They need to capture both ends so that they can roll jeeps and heavy equipment through and hopefully make their way to Germany in a lightning strike to try and end the war before Christmas.
Yeah, World War II.
Yeah. But the plan is put together in basically 7 days to prep and everything, and you kind of can guess what goes on from there. At the beginning, they do frame this as you have these 2 commanders. You have Montgomery on the British side, and you have Patton on the American side, who intensely dislike each other. And both of them want to have their plan go forward to end the war. In this case, this is Montgomery's plan that was called Operation Market Garden. So that kind of gives you the context of how the movie is set up.
And just if I can give a little more historical perspective, Monty became a famous hero to the British people because of his work in North Africa. After that, he kind of rode that with less results. On D-Day, he was supposed to capture Caine so that they would have a port, so they wouldn't have to use these portable piers that they brought in, and it took him forever to do it. He then tried to take Antwerp, and the problem with taking Antwerp is that Antwerp is way inland up this thing called the Scheldt. Schilt. And well, I don't know how you.
Oh,
pronounce
this is,
it in Dutch.
we're gonna have to bleep that one out later, Lou.
No. But it depends on what part of Holland you're from, I'm told. The point is, you can capture this port, but it's not really on the ocean. It's way up this inlet, and the Germans owned all the territory in between. So Monty was under considerable pressure to deliver on his reputation, but at the same time, he was kind of the hero the British had. And Churchill and everybody else wanted to keep him in the game for morale reasons. And so Monty controlled the Allied forces on the northern side and Patton everything south. And they were indeed bitter rivals. But the problem was that after you got D-Day, and thank God we got D-Day, you had to bring a lot of supplies, ammunition, food, fuel, everything in, and there wasn't enough to go around. So when this operation was chosen as the operation, the fact that it's no spoiler to say it failed, they say perhaps rather than getting the war over by Christmas, it extended the war for at least 6 months because of all the stuff it consumed to get not as far as it wanted to.
Yeah, and on that note, and just sort of following up with what Lorn has been saying, this Operation Market Garden was supposed to be 35,000 men flown 300 miles from air bases in England and dropped behind enemy lines in the Netherlands in order to be able to then get into Germany. So, I mean, this was a massive, massive operation and undertaking.
The biggest airborne drop in the war.
Yeah.
Much bigger than D-Day, much bigger than Italy or anywhere else.
It was an incredibly bold plan, but I think right at the very beginning, they kind of telegraph just how improbable it was that they were going to enjoy success. The idea was that they were going to capture these bridges in 2 days, and they needed to capture both ends of all of these bridges in order to get their line set up so that they could roll heavy equipment through.
And then they had to get there because that was one narrow road to move all of these tanks and soldiers up. And once the Germans knew they were coming, after they started it, they sort of didn't have to go anywhere else but there.
Yeah.
But you can see right in the initial briefings where they're saying that the timeline is absolutely crucial and that they have to capture both ends of the bridges. And if there's a failure at any point, the entire operation is going to fail. They were aware of that at the outset. And I think that's what makes this operation such a tragedy, is that the saying is no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. And this is like the case proving the point.
And there were other failures too. For example, the radios were sent into battle with crystals that didn't match. So a lot of units couldn't talk to each other and couldn't talk to base to tell them where they stood. At one point, plans of the operation, which were marked, do not take into battle, went into battle with somebody, were found by a German soldier in a glider that had crashed because everybody was killed in it, including the guy carrying the plans. And he brought them back to the general and said, see, this is what they're going to do. Happily, at least in the movie, I'm told in real life it wasn't necessarily so. The Germans thought, well, this is a plant. This can't be the real thing.
Nobody would be that stupid.
Yeah, the other huge, well, also there was a precedent. You know, I don't know if anybody's ever seen The Man Who Never Was, but the British intentionally put a dead body off the shore of Spain, knowing the Germans, or the German intelligence through the Spaniards would get it with fake plans for D-Day. But the big thing was that because at that point Holland was a backwater, and because at that point the Germans knew that the British and the Americans were having to regroup and slow down their advance, which had cut right through France, they were using this area as a R&R. And it just so happens that the Brits were told, well, there's nobody there but old men and kids and under units. Turns out one of the major panzer units was told, well, send them over there. There isn't anything over there. They can rest up and refuel over there. And lo and behold, they found themselves ready for this operation.
And that's what I found kind of, you're absolutely right. This movie is a tragedy. And watching the comedy of errors leading up to what is ultimately a disaster. And, you know, by the end of the movie, that final shot on all of those wounded soldiers, it just shows you, gosh, I mean.
And supposedly when Connery was approached to do this, he said he didn't want to do it because he didn't want to do a movie that glorified war. And once he read the script, he realized this is an anti-war movie and decided to do it.
Well, it's not just anti-war, I think. It's also about the hubris and the pride and hubris and stupidity of upper management and bureaucracy.
Yes. And by the way, Dirk Bogarde took flack because the character he plays was a buddy of his, the real guy. He was one of Monty's assistants, and they couldn't put Monty in the movie as the guy that goofed because Monty was still so revered in England. So they took his number two, who executed the plans, and made him the guy who at the end says, yes, well, I always thought we went a bridge too far. And his family, they said if he'd been alive, he would have sued. Wow. So it broke up a friendship that he had with the real guy that he played.
Well, you know, on that note, I have to say that even at the beginning of the film, well, not at the beginning, but before the operation commenced, you did have that one soldier who, you know, the one with the nervous stutter, who
the young
wanted
intelligence officer,
young intelligence officer who wanted to do another flyby just to make sure. He brought those photos of the tanks. They were like, nah, those are probably just, what did they say? Broken down hulks and whatnot. It just, it feels like any bureaucracy in the world, basically, right? Like you can't turn the Titanic around on a dime. And it was morbidly amusing watching the German reaction to all of this. Like not only that, when they found those plans, they thought, no, there's no way these are real. But also prior to that, when they realized that the troopers were landing 12 kilometers away, the German general, his first reaction was, oh, well, they're here for me. They must have discovered that I was here. And they're like, well, would they be, maybe they're here for the bridges. He's like, why would they land 12 kilometers away if they were for the bridges?
And of course, that was about not having good drop zones that were close enough because the land was wet because Holland is mostly flooded. There were a lot of things that had they had 6 months to plan it. Had this been D-Day, these things wouldn't have happened, and maybe the whole thing would have been canceled.
They already had a shortage of aircraft, too, which is why they were so nervous about where they were going to be landing. They couldn't. And why they had to send in
successive waves of paratroopers rather than all at once. And they had fog in England, so they couldn't take off. Gene Hackman plays a Polish paratroop commander who is basically twiddling his thumbs in England saying, get me into the fight. And they say, well, there's fog. And he says, well, why don't you take me down there where there isn't fog? He said, well, you know, fog moves and you might go down there and find it's bad. You'll just have to wait.
I was pleased to see that weatherman was played by Denholm Elliott.
Yes.
You'll know as Marcus Brody from the Indiana Jones film.
Yes.
So.
And there's some, you know, the casting, there's some great moments of heroism in this movie, by the way. And perhaps one of the most stirring is a true story. And that is the role of James Caan, who he's a sergeant, and his commander, his captain, I think it is, says, guarantee me I'm not going to die when they're waiting to go. And he does. And he finds his body seemingly dead, puts him in a Jeep, goes through the Germans, goes to a medical facility where Arthur Hill is the doctor and says, take care of him. He said, what are you kidding? He's dead. Well, no, he isn't.
It's important to note that you can see that he's got a gunshot wound to the head.
Right in the forehead. You see the bullet hole.
Yeah.
And it's a true story. It's entirely a true story. Which is shocking to most people who see the movie, but it really happened. And supposedly, Jimmy Caan said that when Richard Attenborough, who directed the film, who those of you who know him as an actor will know as Welcome to Jurassic Park, but he directed this and lots of other great movies. And when he came to California and talked to Jimmy Caan, he offered him several roles, and Caan said, that's the one I want. And at that point, they were thinking about hiring De Niro for that part.
Really?
Yeah. That's Attenborough over there on the right, of course, in the boat.
Yeah.
That would have been wrong. I think they got the right guy.
It would have been terrible.
The one, I mean, there were so many things about this movie. Number one, we got to stop choosing these films that are 3 hours long. Gosh, I started watching this thing on Tuesday that I didn't finish until like Friday. But it just sucked me in, like right from the get-go, and I wasn't prepared for that. Like, for those of you who haven't seen the film, it'll take it out of you, but it is well worth the watch. Like, you can really see the shoulders upon which Hollywood is standing with these films. And in a lot of ways, I got to thank you, Lou, and you, Lauren, for introducing me to these new films. And like through this genre guy's vehicle, I'm seeing all these amazing movies that I hadn't seen before, I'd heard about. And it kind of puts into light how far Hollywood has fallen. Like, my God,
and quickly, these movies, this is 70?
Yeah, 77.
But we're doing some soon that are very, very recent, and it just shows you how far and how fast things have deteriorated.
but like the production quality, the amount of just raw manpower that went into all of these shots, like the soldiers, the boats, the tanks, the cars, like none of it was CG. Like it was all there. Like, I mean, yes, there was a bit of green screen here and there, but good God, like the amount of effort that went into this, and
the
cost.
production values are partly because of some really good timing. It turned out that both the Greek and the Turkish armies were in the process of updating all their tanks and trucks. So they got them real cheap from them to be in this movie. Some of them not the right models originally, but even so. And there were only four real Sherman tanks in this movie. The rest are Land Rovers with plastic shells put on top of them. And some of these people that live on Finding Faults have pointed out certain scenes where you can kind of see the car wheels underneath and the treads are really not touching the ground. But
I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known that if you hadn't said that to me. And it's funny because I have watched a number of war movies, but this is the first one I really honestly have to say where it felt the most representative. And I'm not sure why that was. I don't know if it was the framing, the lack of music during, some of the battles. It wasn't even particularly that bloody, but there was just something about this film, the intensity of it, that for the first time really watching this, I felt, oh my gosh, like you get some sort of inkling of what it must have been like during that particular time. And it really, I wasn't prepared for how much it hit me.
And by the way, speaking of the music, which is great, John Addison, who did the score of this, was in 30 Corps on this mission. He was in that tank force.
No kidding.
Yes. Wow. He had been at D-Day, he'd been at Caine, and he was a tank commander in the mission that this covers. And in a really sort of 6 degrees of separation thing, we said that this film is 1977. Back in 1958, Addison scored a movie called, are you ready? I Was Monty's Double.
Wow.
And you would know his music from Sleuth and from the 7% Solution and, well, all kinds of great movies. Moll Flanders, Tom Jones, Torn Curtain, Hitchcock. Good movie we should do sometime, by the way. Mm-hmm. Charge of the Light Brigade, Start the Revolution Without Me. But what's beautiful when you really listen to the theme of this, it's a crusade, it's positive, and it has all the notes of sadness in it,
yes,
too, of the futility of it. By the way, another historical note, there you see, of course, the major stars, or most of the major stars. General Jim Gavin, who's played by Ryan O'Neal. A lot of people say, oh, what's this punk kid? And he's a general. He was that young. And he was one of the best unsung, mostly, generals in World War II. He had fought in North Africa and in Sicily. And he was like 35 years old when this happened. He was quite something. And then, of course, you have Fox, who is, if you know Laurence Fox, his uncle, who has that great speech where he's briefing everybody, where he says, well, I kind of think of this as a good old-fashioned American Western. And the guys at the bridge are the settlers, and the Red Indians, the bad guys, are circling them, and we come in as the cavalry and save the day. Which
and then there was that
kind of, what's the word, hubris that they had.
And then the line later on where they're like, well, of course, the cavalry always arrives, just in the nick of time. They're not like they're always late.
I think it's Michael Caine. He says, we wouldn't do to be too early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the note of tragedy, there's two things that I think are important to mention. And that is because for most of this movie, you don't see the big stars together. You see them in their own scenes where they're each going through their own part of the operation.
Yes.
And what's interesting is that some of the people are having just a terrible time even getting started. And then you have Frost, who's going through Holland, who's absolutely mobbed by everybody, being seen as a liberator. And they're throwing flowers and everything, and it's almost as though they think they've already won the day. And because they can't communicate with each other, you would naturally assume that everybody else is getting the same kind of treatment, but that's not so.
Anthony Hopkins, who is just plain brilliant in this movie, and plays a guy who was pretty amazing, too, the real Major General Frost, as he became. This is a guy who was born in British India to an army officer and went into the military and fought in India, fought in Palestine. He was in Iraq. Then he came back and was part of the Territorial Army and the Scotch Guards and the Parachute Division and Then, of course, as we know, World War II. And he landed in Tunisia in North Africa, won several medals. And when it was all over, he wound up, as you'll see at the end of the movie, captured with shrapnel wounds in his legs. But then he came back and still fought on. And he remained in the Army after the war. He ran the 1st Airborne Division's battle school and went to Norway. So he then would move to another. He stayed in a long time. He finally retired in 1968 with the permanent rank of Major General, in addition to his wartime decorations. He got the Order of the Bath, and he wound up taking up beef cattle farming in retirement. And he passed in 1993 at the age of 80. Quite a guy. And by the way, although the original Arnhem Bridge is no longer there, the one they built to replace it is called the John Frost Bridge.
Wow.
The final note of tragedy that I want to mention that I think is important is when you're getting to the very end of the movie, when they have made their final push and they have to make the decision to essentially stop the operation. They're a mile from their target.
Yeah.
They only had one more mile to push, and that's part of what almost breaks these men at the end. And that's the nature of war. That's why supply lines and your supply schedules are so important. The Army can only go as far as their equipment and as their food and ammunition can take them.
Well, and seeing Robert Redford's frustration and just the unbelievable sort of exasperation that he had even before that, when the tanks had stopped. And they were like, well, we have to wait for the others to catch up and so on and so forth. He's like, what? Come on. He just risked life and limb. His people had died trying to secure a passageway through. And
well, that's one of the most powerful scenes when they're actually crossing a river on these horrible little boats, and they're under constant fire. And you hear him saying his Hail Marys the whole way through it, and others.
Not even the full Hail Mary, just Hail Mary.
Right, Hail Mary. Right. and you hear some other priests that are uttering the Lord's Prayer, and that's their mantra as they're rowing desperately trying to get to the shore. And that's the movie starts. You can see that there are problems, but the whole way through, you feel like they're going to make this work. It's going to happen.
Because our natural assumption, seeing a movie with problems, is, it's a movie, they'll solve them. And no, in real life, that doesn't happen.
Well, yes, but it's also that as the situation worsens, it just continues to compound on itself. So that where at first you're somewhat hopeful, you go to feeling a little worried, and then you become a lot worried, and before you know it, you're numb with shock. And there are scenes that they're hard to watch just because what these guys went through just to get there.
But the movie plays with you in that way, though. And then so apologies for any spoilers for those who haven't seen it. But I don't know about you guys. My heart was in my throat when those British tanks were crossing that bridge, and that SS officer is like, blow the explosives that we've planted along the bridge, blow it.
Big, huge pile of explosives is hanging under the bridge.
In contravention of his superior's orders. And I mean, at that point, you just think of, they're going to blow the bridge, and then they don't. There was a miswire. The explosives don't go off. And it was one of those almost fake outs where you feel as though they're going to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, and then they get defeated after.
I would also add that, rightly so, there are no snarling, mustache-twirling Nazis in this movie.
Yeah.
There's a couple that are idiots, but most of them are noble guys fighting from their side, trying to make a bad situation better. Max Schell, Hardy Kruger. By the way, they approached Steve McQueen to play the part that Redford eventually got. And when he found out Max Schell was in the movie, he said no, because apparently Max Schell had slept with McQueen's girlfriend at some point in the past. He didn't want anything to do with it. So go figure that. So there's the happenstance of war or peace or something. Anyway, this is a movie about noble, good people in a bad situation doing the best they can. And it really was a near thing. It got so close.
Yeah.
Especially when that scene reminds me when the two guys with the flamethrower go up the left side of this bridge. You see that pillbox in the picture, and 2 British guys go up the left side, and they're going to try and burn out that pillbox, which has the machine guns that are keeping them from getting on the bridge. And he misses, and he hits these 3 sheds behind it, and he says, "You idiot, you couldn't even hit it?" And boom, because they were an ammo dump for the pillbox. So there's all of these little twists that happened, because I should have mentioned Cornelius Ryan, who also wrote The Longest Day that the D-Day movie was made from, wrote the original book. And then the screenplay was by William Goldman, who was not really known for war movies. He did other things, but it works. It just works. It just works.
One other scene that I wanna highlight is this one here that I've thrown up, where at one point the Germans approach Anthony Hopkins' character, basically saying, we'd like to end the bloodshed and suggest a surrender. And the British say, "I'm sorry, we're just not equipped to take all of you prisoner right now." He's like, "No, what? No, we're not accepting your surrender." It's like, what?
Yeah, but they pay for that.
Sure they do.
That the deterioration of that house that they were in throughout the course of the movie is really quite something.
And they built all that by another bridge down the way a little bit, apparently. The actual bridge the buildings were already too modern when they went to look at it, which again isn't the actual bridge, it's the replacement. The paratroop scenes with everybody jumping, 19 cameras.
Wow.
19 cameras to shoot this thing. So if it looks big in the movie, it was a big production management job too.
Oh my gosh.
I was going to ask you about that, because that's the best paratrooper landing scene that I think I've ever seen in the movie.
Yeah, I agree.
And I was wondering how they accomplished it, because it is epic.
It's about, first of all, a lot of storyboarding and a lot of figuring out what you need, but the planes that are in the formation have some cameras, and they have some others that are not seen that are more modern planes. And then, what the heck? You got to have a lot of radios to get guys to jump out of those planes at the right time to all be in the shot, too. I mean, totally off the subject, but it gives you a sense of this. When I was making a TV series at Universal one time, the people who lived up on the hill above the studio in North Hollywood were upset because all the radio frequencies being used on the lot, both for production management, but mostly for the trams and the tour, they were using so many frequencies that they were interfering. People had their garage door openers opening and closing on their own because of stuff from the tour. And they called the FCC, and they found there was like 135 frequencies being used. And so imagine with this, of course, you're out in the Dutch countryside. It isn't as big a deal, but still, or the English countryside, they probably shot some of it in England.
Well, I'm just looking this up right. I'm looking this up right now, and they're saying that the airdrops were comprised a total of 1,000 men. Supplies were dropped from a number of Dakota aircraft. They were gathered by the film company Joseph E. Levine Presents Incorporated. All aircraft were required to be Civil Aviation Authority or FAA registered. And 1,000 men. My God.
So speaking of supply drops, that's another scene in the movie that I think is real poignant, where they're trying to drop all these supplies to their troops, but they're basically dropping them into an area where the Germans have already captured, and so they're basically resupplying their enemy. And the British are trying real hard to light signals and get the attention of the air crew to try and tell them, "No, we're here." But they're under orders.
Been ordered ignore any such signals because it's probably the enemy trying to fool you.
And they couldn't use the radios because of the wrong crystals.
And finally, there is one supply drop that gets relatively close. And this one guy is so frustrated, he's decided that he's got to go and get this canister. And it's an open field there. There's snipers that are covering this area. He's going to be clearly visible. You can see that canister. It's a big, heavy thing. There's no way that he can do this. But he runs out there, and he gets the thing up on his shoulder, and he starts running it back, and everybody's cheering for him. "Come on, get over here." And of course, he gets shot. And as he goes down, the canister opens, and what it is a bunch of those berets that he's wearing on his head right there.
Yeah, a bunch of hats. Yeah.
It's again the senselessness of this, and the incredible bravery with foolishness wrapped in, just wanting to get a win. The frustration that all of these people must have been feeling is just incredible.
Yeah. And I mean, that's sort of capped off again by some of the last lines in the film where Sean Connery's character is sort of angrily confronting the sort of the mastermind behind it, or at least as portrayed in the film. And the response is, well, the higher ups feel that Market Garden was 90% successful. And Connery's like, 90% successful. Then that's when he says, well, I always felt this was going to be a bridge too far.
When he was the primary advocate for the plan.
Yeah.
Well, standing in for Monty in the movie.
Sure. But I mean, he is clearly set up as the guy that you're supposed to, at the end of the movie, feel like you're such a dick.
Yeah. And he knows it too. Like, you can see the way the actor portrayed it, like it was one of those instances, I think, where he knew, or he was played as someone who knew what was going to happen and who, again, just couldn't stop the Titanic, essentially, from running into that iceberg at that point.
Right. And speaking of Titanic efforts, Richard Attenborough directing this thing, and he didn't want to do it. He had done Young Winston, and his plan was next to do The Life of Gandhi, but he was having trouble getting financing for it. And then there was a big uprising in India that meant he couldn't shoot that. So he thought if he did this for Joseph E. Levine, he'd put some money into Gandhi. So he agreed to do it. He wound up from start to finish 24 months on this movie, from the beginnings through post-production.
Wow.
And 18-hour days. And they say that when he was finally done, he literally slept for 3 days straight.
How did this do for awards? I'm sure it must have garnered some.
Well, let's check that out.
I think it got more BAFTA than it did anything Oscar, but
so looking here, okay, right off the bat, it release date was June 15th, 1977. It's a 176-minute runtime. The budget was $25 million, and it made $50.7 million at the box office, so about double its budget. The reception, the film received a favorable but a tepid response from critics, apparently. Critics agreed.
A lot of critics thought it was too long and too circuitous, and
too long and too repetitive is what they were saying. Roger Ebert gave the film 2 stars out of 4. Gene Siskel 2.5 out of 4. Accolades. So it won the Evening Standard British Film Awards Best Film, the British Academy Film Awards. It was nominated for Best Film, but it only won Best Sound, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Edward Fox, Best Film Music, and Best Cinematography. And then the 1977 National Society of Film Critics Awards Best Supporting Actor Edward Fox. Wow. So not a whole heck of a lot, I got to say.
They really got an awful lot out of that $25 million budget, though.
Yeah.
Oh, I think so too. It's a huge movie.
It was only 25 million.
And by the way, 1977, there was some competition, and also some films that were much touted that didn't do very well. The Deep, Airport 77, Bridge Too Far, of course, Black Sunday, Capricorn 1, High Anxiety, Sorcerer, which we're talking about doing in the future, The Spy Who Loved Me, Close Encounters. This was a big movie year, so they were up against a lot of competition.
A little picture called Star Wars.
Yeah, well, that one, but
I can't believe it didn't win anything. Like, I mean, it won some things, but good gravy. That's
there's something to be said for the fact that it's about a failure, not a success, and that might have hurt it.
I do think the runtime's a factor.
Yeah.
Plus, all those actors, any one of them could have been leading or supporting, and they're all big guys. And it's kind of, this one's got these fans and this one's got those fans, and they kind of tend to cancel each other out, which often happens in movies where there's a couple or 3 major stars, especially when they're, in those days, the same gender. Because Liv Ullmann is the only woman in this movie. And by the way, she didn't speak Dutch. They said she learned her lines totally phonetically when she speaks Dutch. And they also said that when Laurence Olivier showed up to do his part, he showed up with these beaten up old brown shoes on and a worn suit, and said that he'd been gardening in those shoes and that suit for a month to make them look like they were worn out, to wear them in the movie and look like somebody who'd been under the impression of the war and of the Nazis. Wow. That's the kind of method actor he was. So,
well, speaking of that, I have to say that I really appreciated the fact that, unlike in the previous movies that we watched, Where Eagles Dare, in this one, the Germans only spoke German. And I felt that added a bit of authenticity to it.
Yes.
Whereas
And that's always been a choice in war movies that, you know, you had to make. Although in this case, of course, they cast German guys to play them as opposed to,
English.
English people playing Germans. There's some English actors who got more famous playing Nazis, I think, than doing anything else because they kept doing it.
So, guys, well, let's do our one thing you like the best about this and one thing you like the least about it. And I'm going to start off with you, Lorn.
It's kind of hard because I can understand some of the critics' complaints about the movie. I described it as a series of vignettes, and I feel kind of like that's what it is. In those vignettes, you've got some really powerful performances. I really enjoyed lots of these big-name actors getting their little moment in their little scene. But I also would have liked to have seen them act as an Avengers-like movie where they're all acting together. And I understand that for the type of movie this is, that's not the way it was going to be. So that's probably my downside. But the upside is, boy, it's got some gigantic scenes. That paratrooper drop, anytime that they're dealing with boats and getting across the water, the tension that you feel throughout every part of this operation. You've got some stellar performances in the short time they have, like Elliot Gould when he's
we didn't mention him, and he's great.
When he has to build this bridge
as the contradiction against the British style and the American style.
Oh yeah,
which was, by the way, just in general about World War II. Eisenhower had never led anybody in combat in his entire career. And many people say that as good as he was at logistics and everything else, the biggest thing he did was made that relationship work between the Americans and the English. And without him, it might not have. Because the English thought, we've been fighting for 2 years. Where have you been? You're all Johnny-come-latelys and you don't know how to be real good soldiers. And the Americans thought, you're a bunch of stuck-up idiots and you've been losing. And here we are. So that contrast in styles is played very well in this film too, and especially with Gould and Michael Caine.
Well, there's a scene with Ryan O'Neal too, when he kind of shows up and starts barking at a guy, and somebody says, "You kind of got to give him a little slack. He had a bad landing the other day, and we think he cracked his spine."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when you see those little individual performances, there's a lot of great scenes there. The downside, though, with having this many stars and this many different parts of the operation that have to go together is that you don't get to spend a lot of time with any of them for very long.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a piecemeal performance.
And when I think about war movies that had this factor to them, which had lots of stars in various parts, the obvious first one that comes to mind is The Longest Day, because D-Day was so many different commanders and different people. But the difference with D-Day is everybody knows how it comes out.
Yeah.
The fix is in. The good guys win. With this, most people are not as familiar with it, and they're not so certain. And there's parts where it seems like, gosh, in spite of it all, they're going to overcome. And then there's parts where you say, oh, God, how can they overcome? There is a level of tension, especially, it's not just that there's all these vignettes. It's when do you choose to cut into the story and when do you choose to cut out of the story? Mm-hmm. When do you leave this guy and go to the other guy? And it's not just about the chronological path of the battle. It's about the beats. And that's why I really give Attenborough credit for overall understanding of where the emotional beats were and how one related to the other.
There's one other thing that we haven't mentioned that I think we probably should, and that is the role of the Dutch resistance, the underground spies. I think it was very wise that they chose to focus on a family who had been paying attention to German troop movements and equipment and material and getting that information out. And that also plays a powerful role in the movie.
Yes.
Tragic role, yeah. It's
and the other movie that has a lot of stars similar that's World War II is the Battle of the Bulge. But even there, it's basically there's Robert Shaw as the German rather than all these different facets of the German army. It's much more limited. And this one really bit off a lot and made it work.
Well, so Lou, on that note then, what would be the highlight and the low light of this film for you?
Gosh, I really think the individual performances of all of these guys. I mean, people got criticism. People said that Gene Hackman's Polish accent wasn't accurate. And
the Germans.
Oh, yeah, well, but, they think about it from the actor's point of view. If you're going to just play, 10 10, 20, 30 minutes in this 2.5, 3 hour movie. A, you want them to be the best damn 20, 30 minutes in the movie just out of pure pride of place. But B, you have to be thinking about what comes before and what comes behind to understand what your role in the overall is, and yet concentrating on your moment. That's not easy. That takes these people who are stars because they're good, not just because they're pretty. You know, I just read this interesting book about a movie I know we're going to do down the road, which is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And they were talking about as big a star as Elizabeth Taylor was. Nobody really thought of her as an actress. They thought of her as a personality and a beauty. But in that movie, she rose to the occasion. And these guys, gosh, there's some good people in there. Look, you could take almost any story and put half a dozen of these guys in it, and it would at least be watchable. But in this case, it's so much more than that. Now, as far as downside, yeah, it's a little long. Yeah, there's moments where it's a little, okay, we get it. Let's go on to the next place. But not many. And you could say that rightly and yet be wrong about the ending, because that long point that it's over, baby, is pretty powerful. And there's a couple little places where they don't, it's like, why at that stage did they bother to send the poles in when they knew it was all falling apart? And the answer is because the poles are supposed to go in. So there's the real star, the real character of this movie is bureaucracy and momentum on both sides, and how they can affect individual lives. And granted, these are all famous people, but meanwhile, there's guys dying all over the place. And all of these guys that played the assistants and the sergeants and the guy with the umbrella. And I don't think this is just too much of a spoiler. John Frost, Anthony Hopkins, number 2, has an old-fashioned British umbrella. And when they're all lying there at the end, and it's like, this isn't going very well, and he's wounded, and he asks him, I'm meaning to ask you, and I haven't asked you because I know you wanted me to ask you, why the heck do you carry that umbrella everywhere? And he explains it's because he has a bad memory and he forgets passwords, but he figures no British guy is going to think he's German if he's carrying that umbrella. I guarantee you that's a real story. You know, you see some of these things and you say, that's not a screenwriter. That's a screenwriter who paid attention, you know?
Yeah.
The words are the screenwriters, but the story's got to be real.
100%.
One more thing. It is a mark of the craftsmanship of this film that these very famous guys, you believe in these parts. It isn't, oh, look, that's Sean Connery. Oh, look, that's Robert Redford. That's a soldier. As much as you know they're stars, they don't step out of themselves to be who they really are. They play the people that they're playing. And as I said, some of these stories that I guarantee you the average person seeing this movie thinks that whole bit with Jimmy Caan and the doctor was absolutely a fabrication. And there are some who could say, well, why'd you put that in? It doesn't advance the story. It's real and it happened, and it's powerful stuff.
And I mean, especially the way where the doctor confronts him afterwards and says, I can't just, not punish you for this. If I let you get away with this, then everyone's going to start doing this. Yeah. And he takes him to the sergeant in arms and says, arrest this man for 10 seconds.
He looks at him, he says, what? He says, count to 10.
So I mean, that
you gave me a real scare there. Yeah, you gave me one too.
Yeah, right back at you.
And when he hands him he says, "This is yours." I think he says, "Yeah, it looks like mine, sir." The gun that he used to hold him up to make him look at his guy that everybody thought was dead.
And I think that for me is the highlight of the film. Like it really is a sense of human triumph in the face of not just colossal tragedy, but colossal stupidity. Like how even it's showing us at our best and our worst, I guess, but still,
really every individual who's involved in this massive, eventually a mistake, is doing what he thinks is the right thing for the right reason with the right preparation. And, there's a little problem with the radios. Well, that happens. Oh, there's a little problem with seeing these tanks. Oh, that's probably all the tanks there are. Because the momentum of the thing is so strong that nobody can get in front of it and say stop.
Not one person can stop. And I'd say the downside for me, echoing what Lauren said, what got me really excited when I started the film, seeing all of those names together, I thought, oh my gosh, I've never seen, Connery and Hopkins and Hackman all kind of acting and chewing the scenery together. So to not have them all Michael Caine too, like to not have them all just sort of have one particular scene where they're all on screen at the same time reminds me a little bit of the whole we never had Han, Luke, and Leia together in the sequels type of thing. But
well, I think the reason though is that this is a real historical story.
Yeah, I know.
What we're wanting is a 70s version of the Expendables.
I know.
but due to the fact that they have to be historically accurate, it's like you can't really do the all these men on a mission together.
And they all came into it knowing that they get a little piece of the pie, that nobody's the star.
Yeah,
that was part of the idea that they all got paid the same until Redford rocked the boat.
Yeah,
but it's a movie you must see at least once to understand how you can take a historical reality and make it into a human drama, I think.
So I mean, if you're going into this, don't expect to see them all on screen at the same time. It would have been amazing if there had ever been a film like that, but it's not this one. But still, it is something that you definitely would have. Like, you have to watch this. Like, I mean, anytime if I ever run across someone who's never seen it, that will be my first thing. Like, you have to see this film. Like, this is one of those seminal must watch. Like this shows I feel like this is one of those films that just absolutely captures Hollywood at its best.
And God, I love the music.
Yeah.
This guy, John Addison, he understood how to be pomp, circumstance, British, and still have this poignancy to it and this sadness to it, in spite of it all. That pretty special stuff. And
well, on that note, speaking of our best, we were given a very nice surprise by WWII Pro when he told us that the last movie that we did, which was on the Disney cartoon Hercules, was the most viewed Genre Guys segment ever. And we're trying to figure out why. Let us know your thoughts down below. Do you guys want more cartoons? Do you want more Disney films? Do you want more good Disney films? Give us your thoughts.
When Hangry asked me about why I thought it was, I said, because we all feel nostalgia for the great Disney animation that was so recently the rule. But I think another practical reason is that because of the whole problem we had with YouTube, suddenly we've had a whole bunch of new members, thanks to gifted memberships from some wonderful, wonderful people. And they're just discovering us. So if you're just discovering the Genre Guys, we've now done maybe a dozen movies, and we're going to keep doing them every week. Go back and look at the old ones and see what you think too. And again, we always ask, tell us what you anticipate for us to do next, because we've got several in the pipeline, but there's always room for more.
Absolutely. So give us your thoughts. Let us know what your feelings were. Did you see this film? Did you like our review? Are you encouraged to go and see it? We live for your feedback, so do not hesitate to do so. And on that note, guys, any final words on A Bridge Too Far?
I just want to say that next time we have a very special guest genre person.
Ooh.
I won't say guy because I don't know, in this day and age, but it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to the next one. I think it's going to be a blast. So tune in for that one.
This next one should rightly take the crown of most viewed. So come back. You guys are gonna love it, guaranteed. And on that note, I will bid you all a wonderful day, night, wherever you may be. Still working on that outro though, so we're gonna have to talk about that. But until next time, we will see you back here, possibly the same time, probably the same place.
Same bat time, same bat channel. And next time it's holy greenness.
Yeah.
That's as much of a clue as we'll give you, but the smart ones out there will figure it out.
Indeed. And with that, we'll talk to you soon.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of the Genre Guys here on 23PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it. And if you want to enjoy every episode of the Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WWII Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing film? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WWII Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.